Hey, welcome to the Curious Minds podcast. This is a brand new undertaking that we're doing over at the Christian Student Center at the University of New Mexico. I am your host, Evan Van Sickle, new to the area, new to this level of heat, and new to this large of a city, but enjoying myself, and I'm going to make the most of this. Part of making the most of this is going to be bringing this podcast to you each week, calling this Curious Minds, hoping to inspire some curious thoughts from those who are seekers, skeptics, questioners, and hoping that those who are dedicated to a Christian mind will let the Lord, the Kurios, be the Lord of their minds. And I hope to give tools to both Christians and non-Christians to get us thinking, asking the right questions, and engaging correctly with the difficult issues facing Christianity and Christianity's opposition. So this is an apologetics podcast. I make no apologies for that. It is what fascinates me and what I feel called to at this time. So here's to doing it to the best of my ability in an area that I believe can benefit greatly from it. So, with this new project, I asked, what do I want to address first as an issue on an apologetics podcast? And I kind of went a non-conventional route. I'm going with the topic of listening. Oh, yeah, you wouldn't expect that from someone of an apologetics mind. We're the ones that like to hear ourselves speak and just grind away with the gears in our own mind. But here, in this first installment, I want to talk about listening. Now, I want to warn you that this first series of podcasts is scripted, so if it sounds like it's rehearsed, it kind of is. It's not always going to be that way, but for these ones, I wanted to carefully lay out the verbiage, and later on, it'll get to be a little more live and a little more conversational. And this is going to center around in James chapter 1, verse 19, which says that everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. And I wonder if apologetics gets a little bit of a bad rap because we are not usually known for being slow to speak and quick to hear. So this next series of podcasts is going to focus around this point. Now, what do you see when you imagine apologetics and evangelism in action? Do you see a one-on-one conversation? Do you see a crowd situated in a formal setting? Do you see a heated dialogue? Do you see an unwelcomed and invasive man forcing his words upon others, possibly unsuspecting passerbys? What type of mood or feelings arise when you put yourself in that setting? Maybe you're a Christian who is passing by as you hear one of these heated dialogues. It probably does not put your emotions at ease. You probably also feel that you cannot approach the individual who is raging through a heated dialogue. If you are turned off as a Christian, imagine how a non-Christian feels in such circumstances. Not only are they being told that they are wrong, but they feel personally diminished for their wrongness. The goal of apologetics and evangelism is to bring a person to the truth. And how will they know the truth unless someone goes and tells them? According to Romans 10, 14, and 17, consequently, speaking is a necessary component to sharing the truth. There are basically two ways to think about the place of communicating the truth. Lead with proclamation or lead with listening. Now, don't get me wrong, discussion can get heated and remain appropriate. And there's a place for public speaking in which onlookers ought to quietly pay attention. However, given the general atmosphere of apologetics and evangelism, I want to argue that listening needs to be preeminent to proclaiming. There's no need to overstate this and say that Christians everywhere have it all wrong. No, I have seen many exemplary people in this regard. I also know that there are certain people who love the sound of their own words more than they love the soul of the next person. I also know what that feels like because I get to live with the same tendencies of my own life, thoughts, and actions. Unless solipsism is true, I'm not alone in this. In the past, the skill of listening and conversing were a given, but those skills are changing, if not diminishing. There are a few reasons that it is more important than ever to offer attentive listening. First major reason is we live in a more distracted world. According to Joe Takish of Going Bonkers magazine, hey, I didn't name it. Joe says we typically only listen at a quarter of our listening capacity. Takish goes on to identify the areas in which the 3/4 level of distraction takes place. Suffice it to say that good listening occurs when distractions are tuned out, which is motivated by a genuine concern for the other person. As part of this, Americans are listening to music more than ever. Forbes recorded the increase in the amount of time Americans spend listening to music. In 2015, they listened to 23.5 hours per week. In 2016, they listened to 26.6 hours per week. And in 2017, it jumped up to more than 32 hours per week. Typically, people listen to music as a background activity, something that happens while they're doing other bigger priorities. This means that we're making ourselves used to passively listening to things. This could reinforce the fact that our default is not active and engaged listening. Then there are the things that Americans watch. A 2018 study found that Netflix alone garners 1 hour and 11 minutes of time from its viewers every day. That's just Netflix. Business Insider reported that time spent watching TV and time spent on the internet were about to converge at around 2 hours and 40 minutes each per day. Now add in social media, games, and other uses of screen time, and according to studies, you could be approaching 9 hours a day of eye contact with an impersonal electronic. When our minds are used to seeing rapidly changing images with more glitz and higher definition, we can begin to instinctively crave such visual stimulation. This can make simple listening more challenging. It can make basic eye contact seem boring. With minds that are so used to rapid changes and stimulation, we are tempted to think that the other person himself is not enough. It's as if he must do something particularly spectacular. He has to be lit on fire while doing a series of backflips on the edge of a cliff if he's going to truly hold our attention. Only appreciating the spectacular puts an unfair pressure on the other person. But good listening lets them know that they do not need to perform to be valued. As human as they are right now is enough for them to warrant a full appreciation of their value as a person. As human as they are right now is enough for them to warrant a full appreciation of their value as a person. So this has led to a more impersonal world, this distractibility. With so many things battling for our attention, people tend to slip into the default activities. These typically consist of gaming, TV, Netflix, YouTube, scanning social media, and multitasking with music. Unless a better opportunity presents itself, why would a person not access a free and easily accessible method of entertainment? This has led to the numbing of social emotion because we're teaching ourselves that impersonal is okay. Impersonal is normal, so we might as well make the most of it. However, this is like going without water all day. A person who is dehydrated will deceive himself into thinking that he is only hungry. While the void inside is for water, he will reach for the food, goodies to serve himself a quick fix. It may give him a quick burst of energy, but it would be at an expense. The snacks mask the bigger problem of a parched body. This is similar to the interpersonal void that resides in each person. God did not create us to be isolated into crowded corners of our world. He created us to be alongside others, gleaning the benefits of the way He has uniquely fashioned them. This does not mean that all the time must be personal and face-to-face. Clearly, media is a powerful tool for beginning to connect with others, but it's not a replacement. Time away from others can be very significant in maintaining the best mental state that you can offer others. This is why Jesus isolated Himself early in the mornings. Such isolation actually served the purpose of improving His time alongside others. It was an intentional time of reinforcing the most important relationship in life, the relationship with the Father. In short, we need to be intentional about maintaining the social health of ourselves and those around us. We were created for meaningful personal time. To maximize on this, we need to be able to call ourselves and others beyond the distractions that only mask the void. As listeners, Christian witnesses can call people back toward the fullness of who they are created to be. There are a couple other psychological benefits to listening as well. Some practical benefits, such as voicing concerns, reduces frustration. One of my previous lines of work involved working with special education students. Behavior management was a huge priority, often very tough. It helps to know what triggers a behavior in order to keep the student in an environment in which he or she can learn best. Often the trigger for a behavior had to do with the inability to communicate something to another person. Part of this has to do with a lack of communication skills, such as being nonverbal. Part of it has to do with staff not being aware of what was already being communicated. When the student was not heard, they had a hard time hearing. But when the student felt that they had basic social needs met, he or she was much more able to listen and learn. This will undoubtedly translate into the general populace as well. Frustration builds as they are filled with thoughts and questions that go unnoticed. A person who is not heard, who does not feel that they are having their basic personal and social needs met, will often respond in inappropriate ways. It may not be a temper tantrum, but it might be cursing, or insults, or excuses, or apathy, or avoidance, etc., etc. Next practical benefit, communication is a vital step toward healing. Medical doctor Scott Fishman authored a book dedicated to the often overlooked and undertrained field of pain management. He believes that skillful listening is a step to manage each individual's hurts. Fishman says, and I quote, "Treating pain requires getting close enough to a patient to peer inside his life, to discover the precious things that pain has taken away, and then figure out how to restore that loss." He goes on to state that when patients are heard by someone who cares, they tend to heal better inside and out. Listening well establishes trust, and this creates stronger bonds. Psychology Today's Kristen Vukovic says, "When people feel relaxed, guards go down." She goes on to promote conversation that does more than simply takes up time. She sees the need for conversations that open a person up to share things that are especially meaningful. Such conversations may feel like they are invasive or uncomfortable, but they can actually lead to happier outcomes. Some of the pressure of life feels eased as people talk through the things that have shaped them, including things that continue to bother them. People usually do not naturally move to deep, meaningful conversation. They do not want to come across as desperate, needy, or burdensome to the person with whom they are talking. To avoid this, you, the listener, need to take a genuine interest in the things that they share. Let the smile come out a little bit. Reinforce that they are not crazy or less important for what they struggle with or how they think. Remember, there is a reason behind every action, and most ideas have reasons behind their acceptance. To put it briefly, when you give a rip, you rip open a passage into their world. The American Psychological Association reports that active and engaged listening has great relational benefits. Participants in their study reported attaining a much greater sense of personal closeness and greater levels of satisfaction from the stresses they discussed. This directly leads to the speaking person feeling a greater sense of comfort. They don't feel the need to perform and begin to have a greater confidence that they can confide things for which they won't be made fun of, or shamed, or embarrassed. This means that a greater amount of openness is achieved through active and engaged listening. Their discussion portion states that, and I quote, "listening by itself might already function as a support strategy in relationships." The question remains whether listening is also part of the coping, stress relieving, and healing. I would wager that there is mutual benefit when such healthy conversation takes place. This ought to be encouraging for those of us who feel the encounter was a waste of time because they didn't get to offer much practical advice or life-altering knowledge. With the proper heart and steadfast intentionality, fueled by prayer, these listening-oriented conversations are worthwhile. To assist this dynamic, the evangelist or apologist must have certain things in place. He must have a person with him in whom he can confide. He should have that social void fulfilled elsewhere so that he does not need to depend on these other personal encounters to find fulfillment. He must also find ways to have security in the value of his work. The value is in treating other people with dignity, seeing them the way God sees them. Regardless of whether the conversation can move to heavier metaphysical resolutions, you've already brought about Christian values by glorifying God and showing deep concern for others. However, I'm not saying that we should neglect seeking out such depth of conversation. We'll certainly discuss that later. Again, when you give a rip, you rip open a passage into their world. And seeing their world for what it is will be the best way to show them truths that transcend their world with the hope that overlaps time and eternity. It is hard to reach for that hope if that hope does not relate to or help explain their present world. Their present world comes to the surface through listening. This is why any of us who are interested in maximizing our potential as evangelists or apologists ought to lead with listening. So I hope this discussion has encouraged you to be a good listener, to be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, in order that the other people can understand that you have a genuine concern for them because you're willing to engage with and listen to them as they are and provide them the dignity of people that would honor God. Next time, we're going to look at one practical step that we can take to implement this and really maximize our conversations, and it's the step of asking good questions. Good questions will have a way of guiding a conversation in a way that most benefits the person that's speaking and the person that's listening, and it can also bring about some interesting information and begin to have apologetic value. So until next time, I'm Evan Van Sickle, coming to you from the Christian Student Center at the University of New Mexico. On this, the Curious Minds podcast, where we provoke good conversation and talk about the things that matter most and address issues in Christian apologetics in order that we can have a strong faith that is both passionate and intelligent. I will talk to you again soon. Have a great week. God bless and guide you.